Greg Palmer lives in Adelaide and is a member of the Aberfoyle Park ecclesia. He's recently published a book through the Christadelphian, and it's available from the Christadelphian website and the Scripture Study Service. The book is entitled Simply Revelation. The jacket introduces the book as follows. Why another book on Revelation? Since the earliest days of the Christadelphian community, authors have written much on how to interpret Revelation and on the wealth of historical information that it contains, including its many connections with other parts of the Bible. For many, however, Revelation remains a confusing book, or even, sadly, a closed book. In the hope of providing simple solutions to the complex challenges that Revelation presents, this commentary is designed to be accessible to the average reader, debunking any mystery about the last message of our Lord Jesus Christ. Although it differs in some details from the thoughts of early expositors, it is intended to be a relatively simple presentation of sound thoughts from the last 250 years, assembled in a readably accessible format for the modern reader, simply Revelation, expounded in a way that readers can easily read and understand. Again, the book's available at the Christadelphian office, that is www.thechristadelphian.com, and the Christadelphian Scripture Study Service, see sss.org.au. Greg, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations again.
Yeah, not at all. It's great to meet with you again.
I've recently purchased a copy of the book Simply Revelation. Is it Revelation Simply or Simply Revelation?
Simply Revelation. Either would work. It's intended to sort of show that Revelation can be simple and it's Revelation made simple. Maybe that would have been a better title, but...
Well, I think you've achieved the goal. I have read the book and highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I found there was a couple of haha moments for me, which I found really helpful. And there might be people listening who are a little bit similar to me. I suppose there'll be lots of people in different positions, but I've sort of studied lots of pieces of Revelation in lots of pieces. Look at the seals, look at the vials, look at the kingdom, prophecies, et cetera, et cetera. But I loved going through this book and getting a feel for the book as a narrative, as it's designed to be read as a letter.
Yeah, it's short enough, I guess, and straightforward enough for you to be able to do that. It leaves a lot undone. So if you were hoping for something, very detailed, this is not the book for you. But if you're hoping for something straightforward, but with enough detail to hold it together and to explain or to offer explanations or references where you can find them, it may well be the book for you.
What was your mission when you thought about how this book differs from a number of other books? Obviously, Eureka would be at one extreme potentially, but there's a number of other books that have been written by the Brotherhood on Revelation. How does yours differ?
Well, I didn't actually start out trying to write a book.
Okay.
My original mission was to do a plain language paraphrase of every verse of Revelation, so that where you had a challenging symbolic section, I would have something that I could put in my margin, and perhaps others as well, that offered a simple... Brother Thomas called them synthetic exposition, by which he meant that he's put together, so synthetic, something he's manufactured, exposition and a paraphrase. So a plain language explanation of what the symbols are talking about that could go alongside Revelation. That was the initial intent, but I quickly discovered that wasn't enough, and either the plain language paraphrase left people wondering, how did you arrive at this, or I still don't understand this. And it needed to have just a little more content, if that's the right word, explanation and exposition to go with it, to support it and to offer some further clarity. So it kind of grew, but the intention was to not have very much about each verse, but just enough to make it clear.
Well, I think you achieved that. And so for those of you who haven't seen the book and are interested, so each verse, or sometimes it's a couple of verses together, but generally it's one verse. Well, actually, I'm looking at the Revelation 1, the first two verses. There's like a red box, and you've got the two verses from the King James Version, I think it is. And then you've got a yellow box with your interpretation, if you like, your synthetic, what was it? Synthetic
exposition.
Synthetic exposition. I'll try and remember that. And then your description. So each one has these two boxes, which makes it very easy to follow, as you're reading through. So that's that worked really well. I found it very helpful. Who's the target audience?
Anybody, but especially a younger reader who may not have been exposed to Revelation that much, but any reader who wants to get an overview of the book simply and be able to comprehend it, particularly readers who are confused, who've seen so many different approaches and differing thoughts, and now aren't sure even what approach is correct, and how can I be certain? And perhaps those have been turned off by controversy or by just the sheer amount of stuff that's there that's overwhelming. Just to say, well, it doesn't need to be overwhelming. It doesn't need to be challenging. It doesn't need to be controversial. Even at times, if it is all of those things, we can just distill the Lord's message down reasonably simply. And there's some really strong threads that work their way through the letter that you can follow, and it becomes a whole lot easier. So it's anyone really, but perhaps not Brother Thomas or Brother Roberts,
the expert. Yeah,
they would look at it and go, "This is a bit lean. It leaves so much undone." I thought my Eureka was better than that. Well, of course it is. And I lay no claim to having anything of the caliber and quality of Eureka or even 13 lectures. I've used those as resources and tried to present information more simply. So the expert on Revelation already, they may enjoy the approach on one level, but it's not really written for them. It's written for the ordinary person.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I think even subconsciously it had that effect on me. I mean, look at the 6 vials, or look at the 6 trumpets or whatever, and you, in the back of your mind, you might have, well, this is an interpretation, and I can see how you can squeeze that into history. And you sort of, if that's all you look at, you sort of have that lingering thought, well, is this just a convenient sort of manipulation of history or slotting in sort of the... But when you actually look at the book as a whole, follow it right through, you can see how it all slots together. And it definitely had that effect on me. I was very convinced as to the interpretation as largely given to us by John Thomas. And there were those before him, of course.
Yeah.
But that interpretation rang true when I went through the book as a whole.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of research into the style of interpretation, and what we now know as the continuous historical, which is the approach I've adopted.
Well, before we get into that, let's talk about the alternatives to that, because you've got a chapter on that, which it's quite brief, but actually was quite pointed and quite helpful. So there's essentially 4 alternatives, which are presented as 4 alternatives to interpreting the book.
Yes. anyone would know that the book of Revelation is presented to us symbolically. So, and everyone agrees that there's no one that says, oh, this is entirely literal, even though there are some people who interpret phrases and sections within Revelation as being literal, almost to a person. Everyone accepts that Revelation is largely a symbolic book. The question is, how do we interpret the symbols? And in interpreting Revelation, there are essentially 4 different ways of looking at it. Some say that Revelation is, it's not intended to be taken literally in any sense at all. It doesn't refer to any specific events whatsoever. It's essentially for spiritual messages. It's, if you will, it's like Jesus giving a parable. When he gave the parable of the sower, for example, or the parable of the 10 virgins, he didn't necessarily have a literal event in mind that these things were based upon. He was teaching a spiritual lesson about, divine things. And people say, well, Revelation is just like that. It's not based on anything. It's all just a big parable, and the parable is about spiritual things and about things in the kingdom, and we aren't intended to take any of it literally. It just has spiritual lessons. And while there is some merit in looking at things that way, and we certainly are intended to take spiritual lessons, very early on in the book, Jesus says, he says, John, I'm showing you things which must shortly come to pass. So John was told what you're going to see are things that are going to happen. So it's not just spiritual lessons, though perhaps there are many spiritual lessons through the book. John was told these are actual events which will unfold. So I think we can discount the thrust of the spiritual reasonably readily and say, well, look, yes, we do take lessons from it, but this is not just a parable with spiritual lessons. This is about real events. Well, that then leads us to the question, well, when are these events going to happen? So the 3 other options are the futurist, that is, it's all going to happen in the future when Christ returns. I'll talk about that in just a moment. The preterist, that's from a Latin word praeter, meaning something that's happened in the past. So the preterist explanation was, oh no, this all happened in AD 70 when Jerusalem fell, and it's the descriptions of the battles and things. It's all about the Roman Empire invading Israel and the end of the kingdom of God with Israel and all of that. Or the continuous historical, what we call the continuous historical, that is starting from John's time and moving forward, and unfolding history until the return of Jesus and beyond. So the preterist and the futurist take very small snapshots of history. The continuous historical takes a very large view. So the continuous historical approach was the only approach that we know that Christian believers and Revelation readers took from the 2nd century down to the Reformation.
That I found interesting. That I didn't know, I must say, that the 3 other alternatives are, relatively speaking, new ideas that are post-Reformation.
Yeah, before the Reformation, there is no documented history that I'm aware of that there was any other explanation but the continuous historical. So we might say that the continuous historical is the accepted, traditional, and documented ancient understanding that Christian believers have had since Revelation was written.
And you're going right back to some of the church fathers in this.
Oh, yes, back to Irenaeus, so back to the 2nd century. So we're talking only about 50 or 60 years after Revelation was written. There's documented evidence that Christian believers understood the continuous historical approach and took Revelation to be explaining events in that way. Concerning the other two, they sprang out of the Reformation. Now, in the 16th century, readers might recall that Martin Luther, disgusted with abuses of the church, and we're talking the system, really, and the organisation of the Catholic Church, he nailed a thesis to the door of the church in Wittenberg, outlining almost 100 abuses that he saw, where the church made money from baptisms, from weddings, from all sorts of things, and how there were certain practices, rituals, etc., that were astray, as he saw it, from where things ought to be. So Martin Luther kicked off what swept through Europe as a rebellion against the church, and Protestant churches were formed. There had always been Protestant churches, but not nearly in the numbers that there came to be after the Reformation. And for readers who may not know, that's where the idea of Protestant comes from. It was people who protested against the Catholic Church, against their teachings and against their practices. And
they actually become part of the Revelation themselves, don't they?
They do, yeah. Martin Luther was the very first of those, you might say, in the organised Reformation, although the idea of witnessing against the church is much older than that. But arising from the Reformation, groups of Christians right throughout Europe were questioning, rebelling, reading Bibles for themselves, which is something that the church got particularly steamed up about. And one of the big drivers of the Reformation, with the hands of the Bible in ordinary people's hands, with the Bible in ordinary people's hands, I should say, was the identity of the Catholic Church in Revelation as the bad guys in this whole story. And so the church needed to do something about the Reformation because its power was being seriously challenged, its authority was being undermined, and its influence was being eroded. So the Jesuits were charged with essentially teaching different ideas. So the futurist idea was a concept which was championed by a Jesuit priest called Francisco Ribera. He had a doctorate in theology, and he wrote in 1585. So it's very soon after the Reformation had really gained traction and started to really bite. So we're talking a decade or two beyond the Reformation. Francisco Ribera conceived that the timing in Revelation, those 3.5 years that we read of in Revelation in several different guises, like we hear of it as 42 months, and we hear of it as a number of days, 1,260 days, and we hear of it as 3.5 years. They're literal 3.5 years, and they don't happen till Jesus has returned. So we can't be the bad guy because the bad guy hasn't come yet.
Right.
Independently, another Jesuit, whose name was Louis de Alcazar, was working on his explanation, and he died before he had it finally together, but it was published under his name posthumously about 20 years after Ribera's thoughts. And he said, no, it's not in the future, it's all in the past. These are events that happened, and they happened in AD 70. And whatever the revelation is about, it was it's all done, and it's in the past. So it can't be us because it's already happened. And here we are still going, and it's all concluded. Without going into any detail about either of those two approaches more than that, the fact that the Catholic Church commissioned them to muddy the waters and to throw people off the scent of the church as being the harlot and the associated with the beast and the false prophet and all of that, has to make you seriously wonder, can those approaches be right? Now, I don't demand that just because a Jesuit wrote them, that they therefore are wrong. I think that would be a very unwise position to adopt. And I think many people sometimes take a view that, this is a non-Christadelphian writing, therefore it's suspect and wrong, just because it is. It's quite evident to me that many of Brother Thomas's thoughts in Eureka were drawn from Isaac Newton's work on Revelation, and drawn from Horae Apocalypticae, which is even longer than Eureka. And they, of course, weren't Christadelphians, though Isaac Newton had very similar thoughts to us. So merely to reject something just because it was from a Jesuit, I don't think that's it sort of hangs nicely as a concept and say, well, a Catholic did that, so it's wrong. Not everything the Catholics teach is wrong, and that's why it's a deceptive system. If the Catholics were completely in error about everything, we could look at that and reject it wholesale and say, well, that simply can't be right. But there's a mixture of truth in with the error, and that's where it becomes deceptive. And, there are things that Catholics have written that you can read and look at and say, well, that's quite insightful. That's really quite good. But I don't think the futurist or the preterist explanation of Revelation fit into that category. I think they're just intended to throw people off the Catholic scent and to shift the blame from the church to anywhere else, as long as it's not the church.
So we end up with what we've called the continuous historical approach, which is a view that from John's time onwards, the series of visions are a series of events that unfold right through to the return of Christ. One of the things, I think, anyone who's had any look at the Revelation, and you make the point fairly early on, and I want to talk about structure in just a second, so just putting structure aside just for the moment, the fact that it's not necessarily in chronological order can also be a little bit disconcerting or make it just a little bit tricky, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. And even now, if someone came to me and said, I think you've got some of those bits before, you've got some of those bits a bit the wrong way round, and I see it this way. That wouldn't surprise me.
Right.
There are really some challenging bits in Revelation to work the chronology out.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you made the parallel with a journalist who writes a newspaper article, who might actually start with sort of like a summary, make the point, go into some detail, bring you up to date, and even then go back and put a bit more detail, into an article, partly to keep your attention, partly because it's the way your mind works. And Revelation's a little bit like that. So we have these sort of, it's not just, doesn't just start, it's not a historical document per se. Actually, and you also make the point that perhaps the way it's written and the symbology was perhaps done like this to protect the saints down through the ages.
I think that's almost certainly got to be the case. And I suggest that there were perhaps two reasons why Jesus sent and signified, or gave the message in code, if you like, to John. One was the same reason that Jesus taught in parables, so that people who wanted to understand had to think about it, had to put some effort in, and therefore only the wise, only those who are prepared to put the effort in and to say, well, Jesus is my Lord, therefore I will do my best to understand what he says and work it out and talk to others about it and put the hard yards in to understand it. They would be the ones that would get the message. So I think there's definitely that reason. But it seems clear that if you wrote a book and said, now the Roman Empire is going to persecute these believers, at a time when the Roman Empire was persecuting believers, this would be a sacred text that they would get hold of. And they go, what? This is insurrection. This is treason. We can't have this. And the Roman Empire en masse would have confiscated Bibles and just made utter destruction of Christianity. So it was presented in code so that the opponents of Christ couldn't readily understand the message, and principally couldn't understand that they were the opponents of Christ.
Yeah, so it's like a coded message hidden in plain view.
Yes. Yeah.
But makes it quite exciting when you put it like that, doesn't it?
It does, but I think therein lies the challenge, the twofold reason of Jesus for presenting a symbolic message, so that we really have to think about it, and so that those who are the opponents won't get wind of it. It does make it difficult for us to understand, particularly if we lost the handbook that says, oh, here's the cipher for the code. If we're not quite on the wavelength of Jesus and haven't been able to work out what the code is about, it'd be really challenging.
Which brings me to the structure. I think that was helpful as well, and a couple of ha-ha moments here for me. Let's talk about the structure. It's basically in three parts, and I guess that goes to the verse you've already quoted, where you quoted it in part, where our Lord says to John, he's going to talk about the things which you have seen, the things which are, and the things that shall be hereafter.
Those three parts, by no means equal in their division. The things which John has already seen, which are in chapter 1, that's the vision of one like the Son of Man. That's really kind of half a chapter worth of information. The things which are, that is, the things relating to believers in John's time, that's the letters to the 7 ecclesias in Asia, and that's 2 chapters worth. And the things which shall be is the rest of Revelation, which is 19 chapters worth. And you say, well, how come the divisions are so unequal? And I think it simply relates to the fact that Jesus spends so much time on the history of what happens while he's absent, because he knew there was to be, all those years of it. But here's the other thing. It's been possible, I think, for readers of Revelation to feel that the history could all happen within their lifetime. And it's not been impossible for a reader to say, oh, this could happen soon. Jesus might come tomorrow at any stage down through the history. So we know that Jesus, of course, hasn't come till at least 2023 because he's not here yet. But someone reading it in the 15th century could have the understanding that perhaps all the subsequent things might happen quite quickly.
Yeah. So in that last section, you've got sort of this continuous historical approach, but then punctuated by these visions of the kingdom. And I suppose the other thing there's lots of things that stand out, but one of the other things that stand out are the three great earthquakes that become significant through the course of the writing.
Yeah, and I think if you miss the fact that the earthquakes are symbolic of political upheaval, then it's easy to get sort of blindsided by what the message is about. But the three great earthquakes are essentially when control of the Roman Empire passes from paganism to Christianity.
Mm-hmm. So 300s.
In the 300s. The French Revolution, which was the beginning of the end of power as they knew it for the church, which was the late 1700s. And the big one yet to come when Jesus returns, when politics will be completely overthrown and replaced with a system that Christ sets up.
When we talk about the structure, certainly one I was very familiar with was what you call the telescopic structure. We have like the 6 vials, and then from that, then it amplifies out into the 6 trumpets the 6 seals, 6 trumpets, and 6 vials, etc. Which I think is a helpful way of looking at it. Although I've always struggled to see how it's sort of that meaningful. But one of the things I had never noticed before and I found really helpful was the looking at the structure in 2 halves and separating through to chapter, I guess it's really the end of chapter 11, or 12 even. So chapter 6 through 12, focusing on sort of the political, if you like, side of the Roman Empire. And then the second half focusing on the religious side, which gives some explanation as to why some of the events are actually referenced twice, because they have bearing on both those components of the Roman system.
Yeah.
Can you just expand a bit on that? Because I found that really helpful.
That is not something that I think before I commenced this project I had understood as well as I ought to have done. And in fact, listeners and readers might be interested to know I didn't start this project because I was a Revelation aficionado. I started it because I felt that I ought to be, and I wasn't one yet. And I needed to, for myself, I needed to really get a decent handle on this, and share the simplicity with others. And it's kind of tricky talking about things you're good at, I suppose. And we don't like to be boastful of what we can do well. And there aren't many things that I do well, but I think one thing that I have got the gift of is making challenging things simple. So once I understand a difficult thing, of course you can't explain a difficult thing that you don't get, but once I understand a difficult thing, I'm quite proficient at making it easily understood to the uninitiated and those who sort of haven't heard much of it before. So I kind of took that approach with Revelation and said, right, well, this is quite an in-depth letter from Christ and all these visions. What I want to do is to make it as clear as possible. And I think that the book of two halves is actually the clearest way of looking at the structure of Revelation, because it's what Jesus said to John. Here's a book, and I've written it from two perspectives. If you open the scroll this way, you get that perspective, and turn it over and read the other side, and you get a different perspective about many of the same things. So if you miss that point, Revelation can become quite bewildering, because you have to realize that the book sort of splits halfway as you turn the scroll over. If you imagine someone literally with a scroll in their hand and going, oh, well, I've read that side. Now, whoop, switch it over, roll it up the other way, and start again. And on one side of the scroll, as it were, is presented information about the power and development and judgment of Rome in a political way, and on the other side, as Rome as presented as a religious organization. And of course, many of the things overlap. So in Revelation 6, in the seals, you have paganism being kicked out by Constantine, but then that has tremendous religious implications. So it kicks off in chapter 12 with the next half, with a whole chapter almost on Constantine.
Yeah, and French Revolution, it's there twice. Yes. Same reason. Yeah. For me, a big help. Thank you. And I agree. I think you did make it simple from that point of view, and I did find that very helpful. You mentioned a few of the themes. We won't go into that. Numbers like number 7, number 12, which reoccur through the book, important. You don't spend a lot of time on that. You could write a book on the themes in Revelation, obviously, but you just make mention of them earlier in the book. Perhaps it is worth just mentioning, though, that the name of the book, which you've got a short chapter on, chapter 4, the word revelation or apocalypse, as it's sometimes called. Just tell us a little bit about that.
It's actually the root word of a Greek word, apocalypta, which we find translated in the AV as the word reveal. And I think that's helpful, that when we consider the revelation, this is something which is going to be revealed. And the idea, I think, in Greek means to take the cover off. It's like you come in and there's really interesting smells coming from the pot in the center of the table at dinner time. You go, what's that? You don't know till you take the lid off. You go, excellent. And so you've taken the cover off and revealed to everyone what's inside. That's the idea. So Revelation as a concept was always intended to reveal things. The word that we find in Revelation chapter 1, which is the only time we find it in Revelation, interestingly enough, Revelation 1 verse 1 is the only place where that word occurs.
So when it says the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass, etc.
Yeah, that's the only time it's found in Revelation. But it is found in Scripture in quite a few other places, it's used by Luke, light to lighten the Gentiles, so to reveal to people like you and I what Jesus was about. Paul used it in Romans, a revelation of the righteous judgment of God, to explain to you what and to show you the judgments of God. It's always used in a sense of making something that was uncertain obvious.
Right, so making it clear.
Making it clear, like what happens when you take the lid off that pot and you go, it's curry. Excellent.
So what's being made clear?
What's being made
What's
clear?
The subject?
The subject in Revelation, in a nutshell, is the ultimate triumph of good versus evil, and the plan of Christ bringing the kingdom of God on earth and defeating all of man's machinations, political and religious, and establishing the kingdom of God on earth. That's Revelation in a nutshell.
And that fits quite nicely with the little section you've got called the prologue, where you show that the Revelation at the end of the canon of Scripture, we have these two bookends, the end of Revelation versus the beginning, the first few chapters of Genesis. So the Revelation finishes with a new heaven and a new earth. We've got Christ's spiritual wife. We've got the serpent restrained, the curse removed, sorrow and death removed. The tree of life is accessible to all, and paradise is restored. So that's what's being revealed. That's the story of the Bible.
I hadn't seen that, and I owe that little chart to Andrew Dangerfield. And there were lots of brethren who gave me material that I've used extensively in preparing Revelation. That's just a little gem which had slid past me unnoticed until he pointed that out. That and you look at it, you go, well, of course. I just hadn't lingered over it long enough to see it as plainly as that.
Get into the first chapter. We've got the introduction. We've already sort of mentioned around the introduction that is given to John. We've got a blessing on the readers in verse 3, blesses he that readeth, hears, and keeps the sayings. John's given an introduction into the seven ecclesias. And then we have this vision of the man of one. Just briefly, let us know what that vision represents of this particular man of one, and why do you think it starts the book in this fashion?
I think the substance of Revelation for believers was going to be a very challenging revelation, no pun intended. They were going to discover that there would be years of intense persecution. There would be doctrinal compromises. It was going to be tough times ahead for Christianity. And Jesus wanted to commence, therefore, with a vision saying, yeah, but look where we're going. I will return to earth immortal, and you will all be with me. You will share my glory and my kingdom. And so he starts out with that vision that readers can look at and go, right, this is where it's all heading. It's the Lord Jesus Christ. Sometimes, and as I was growing up, you don't hear it quite so much now, but the phrase the multitudinous Christ, which is kind of quite an old expression.
Right, so the man of one it sounds like a multitude of waters, which is a multitude of people.
Yeah. What it means is Jesus and all of his followers with him in immortal glory. And I think he starts out with that to say, look, this is where we're going. And now I'm going to tell you how we get there, and then proceeds through the rest of the message.
So it puts Christ front and center, but shows us that we're part of that story. Yeah. And that's where it all goes. And lots of bits of those visions that vision is picked up through the rest of the book as well, of course.
Yeah, it is. And I didn't make too much of that because, and in fact, some readers of the book will question my judgment, and fairly so, and say you've compromised detail in the cause of simplicity. And I will say, yes, I have. And there are many things that are left out in the cause of making it simple. Because if you put everything in, you'd end up with a Eureka-sized book that nobody would want to read and nobody would want to print, and it would just sit there unhelpful.
Well, we know that the whole first volume of Eureka is just on the first 3 chapters of the book, so we know that very well.
Yeah, not that Eureka, of course, is unread or unhelpful by any means, but it
well worth the read.
The Brotherhood doesn't need another Eureka. We've got one of those. That
was very well done.
And it would be difficult to improve on that. What I think was lacking in the writings that we had is something that made it really simple, interpreted the verses as we went. And that's what I've tried to do. But yeah, much of the detail of that is lost. But there are, and I thought these were very helpful for me, tables like you have early on in the vision of the first chapter, comparisons with Daniel. And what what readers need to know is that Revelation and Daniel are like the rough copy to the finished manuscript. And the whole approach of Daniel's prophecy and the way he's written it is picked up by Christ, who uses similar symbols in the same way, is speaking about the same entities and the same time periods. There's just more information provided in Revelation and more symbols. But if you don't get Daniel right, you won't get Revelation right.
And it's interesting that the effect of the vision and the information that it had on Daniel is reflected and mirrored in the way John responds to it as well, exactly. In the way that he falls down dead and is lifted up again and eats the roll and so on.
That's a big clue for us to say, well, hang on a minute, where have we heard this before? And I think generally for Bible readers, that's, we talk about this in Bible seminars, look for Bible echoes. Well, you must do that in Revelation. It's the last book for a reason, and where you hear something that echoes it, go back and try and work out why the echo is there. What's the echo from? What was the original sound that's reverberated through to the final pages of Scripture? Because that will be helpful.
The next 2 chapters 2 and 3, are the 7 letters to the ecclesias, or the letters to the 7 ecclesias. We won't spend a lot of time on that necessarily. And you've actually spent a page or so, or maybe even a bit more than that, on each of the ecclesias. So you haven't left that untouched. But of course, it's well studied in many quarters. What's your takeaway from that? Why do you think that was such an important part of this revelation?
Well, there are, I think, a couple of thoughts there. The revelation as Jesus gave it was for Christian believers, was for all Christian believers, wherever they were and at whatever time they lived. And Jesus chose those 7 ecclesias because in various ways they represented the challenges and the victories of believers down through the ages. And it's important that believers get to see themselves in the history, and more than just in the history, but that believers get to see themselves in the glory. So this is essentially the revelation is a revelation of Jesus in glory. That's what it is.
Mm.
A revelation of Jesus in glory, but then it goes back to say, well, look, from there, let's see how we get to Jesus in glory. So if you stopped at chapter 1, that would be a revelation of Jesus in glory. And then he goes, well, hang on a minute, let's now go back and trace our way through history. We'll look at the woman, the true ecclesia, and the harlot, the false ecclesia, and just see how it all pans out, see how the history unfolds until we get to that time of the revelation and the unveiling of the glory of Christ.
Greg, we come to, I guess, the first of the kingdom visions in chapter 4. So appreciate your time, and let's pick that up at a future occasion.
Oh, good. Lovely.